Hello everyone, welcome. My name is David and I'm going to be walking you through this presentation of the Vogo app that we are designing for users to learn vocabulary on the fly. So let's just jump right into it. Vogo is an app we're designing for users who have very little amount of time to put towards learning new vocabulary but still have the need. And so first thing we needed to do in our design process was come up with a persona, someone who would be a potential user of the product. And this is our persona, Thomas. He is a 30-year-old medical student from Chicago. He also happens to be married and a father. So right then and there you can imagine Thomas's schedule is pretty crazy. Thomas is studying pediatric neurology, and he, again, as we had mentioned, has a wife and a newborn son, so his time constraints can be absolutely unimaginable. Thomas constantly finds himself juggling his time between work, school, and making time for his family. That being said, he is still in medical school and needs a way to squeeze in studying new medical terminology into his already very, very tight schedule, and preferably for him, something he can use on the go or on the fly. Some of the problems and goals that Thomas faces around studying new vocabulary and terminology is first and foremost, the time. He has very little time for something like this, but it is necessary. In addition, the medical field is constantly changing, and a lot of the existing terminology is very, a lot of things are very similar. They have similar words, similar meanings, things that can get confused quite easily. He also finds himself jotting down words and notes and definitions on his phone, on post-it notes, things like that, but at the moment doesn't really have a way to organize these things, especially not on the fly or on the go. And in the past, other dictionary and vocabulary apps have kind of fallen short for Thomas, mainly in that they just don't have the expanse of medical terminology that he's looking for. The goals that Thomas has for a product like this, he'd like to obviously be able to study his medical terminology and new vocabulary in about 5 to 10 minute chunks of time, but yet have that be in a very simple and effective way. That being said, he's not spending too much time flipping through screens, clicking through this and that. Just something he can open up on his phone, get started, and get in a nice study session in about 5 to 10 minutes at a time. He also would really benefit from a product that allowed him to add to the already existing dictionary that comes with the app, in the case that he comes across a new word or new term that isn't already available. That way, again, like we had mentioned, he'd have a way to organize all these sorts of notes and vocabulary words all in one place. So getting started in the design process, we started out with drawing out some wireframes and essentially putting those wireframes together to create a functional prototype that we could test. So really quickly, here's just some of the original wireframes that were drawn out rather quickly, just trying to get the idea out there. And as you can see, the revision and editing process already beginning in the initial stages of wireframing, and just kind of determining what's really going to work and what's not going to work right off the bat. Here's some of our original screens put into prototype, and as you can see, we went ahead and built out the initial stages of creating an account and just plain logging into the app. Tried to keep everything very simple and straightforward. Again, not wanting the user to have to go through too many screens to where it's just frustrating and then all of a sudden they're looking for another product. but rather giving them a nice, simple, and quick flow, user flow to get to their end goal of essentially getting into the app, getting started studying, so that they can be done with it and move on about their day. So this is creating an account and logging in. We then went on to building out the option of creating a brand new card, as we had mentioned, in the case where a user would come across a term or new word and want to add that to the dictionary of the app because it didn't already exist. So you can see from our home page, we could hit our plus sign, create a new card with a new word, that word's definition. We can add that word to a category, and if that category or if this word doesn't necessarily fit into one of the existing categories, we could just simply, with one button, move ourselves over and create a new category for that word. So that's sort of the original setup of the prototype. And from there, what we did was we took our prototype and put it into some usability testing. Had some users picked at random that could test out the functionality of the prototype at this stage. So moving on, after conducting our usability tests, first and foremost, we were able to recognize that at our login screen, we were requesting a username and a password, where in the original prototype and wireframes, we had never actually prompted the user to create a username. We had actually prompted them to enter their name, not specifically a username. So we went ahead and corrected that, cleaned up our layout, and again, tried to just keep everything nice and streamlined, not too many screens for the user. And just as we noted here, cleaned up the layout quite a bit from the original wireframes. Moving on to the functions of creating a new card and creating a new category. Luckily and thankfully, we had a really good feedback in terms of this functionality. Our users had very little issues, very little problems at all going through these steps, which was really nice for us, beneficial, and essentially kind of just reinsuring that our gut design was working. It was exactly doing what we wanted it to do, nothing more, nothing less, and again, keeping things simple and streamlined so that the user could get about their study session and move on. But we did go ahead and create, just to clean up and streamline the whole process, created a new menu bar down here at the bottom, and also added in scroll bars where those would be applicable, just to give the user the idea that these would be pages that you'd be able to scroll through more than what you're just looking at here on the screen. But all in all, this step went really well in terms of usability testing. After usability testing and straightening up some of those portions of the prototype, we did go ahead and make a few additions on our own, things that were not necessarily brought up by our users in testing, but just in the process of looking through the wireframes and going over this, a few things that we recognized that would be beneficial that weren't already existing in the app. First thing being that we realized there was no way, after logging into the app, that we had built a way to access your account information, your profile, or any sort of settings for the app. Namely, if you're wanting this app to exist in a different language, adjusting the font size for users, that sort of thing. So we designed the hamburger menu in to the top left of the screen to where you can access this screen, taking you to your account and settings. That way you could edit any of that information after the fact. And then also we changed the button down here to be a speaker button, which would function as an audio file, basically a recording of the word being spoken in correct pronunciation, so that as you're learning it, you could actually listen to that word being spoken, so that in the event you needed to use that, you would be able to use the word in context and pronounce it correctly. So these are some additions that we just did on our own, and feel like they were pretty effective and straightforward additions. So wrapping things up, what we've learned so far, being that the product's not complete yet, but so far what we've kind of tried to wrap our heads around is, first thing, that one of the most difficult aspects of UX design can be just to keep things simple. And that will certainly be our #1 priority moving forward with Vogo. Also, usability testing has proven to be a really great approach into creating a prototype and ultimately a finished product. Getting real users' hands and eyes on it, and not just the people behind the scenes trying to design it and someone who's looking at it over and over and over. And this is putting it into the hands of somebody on a whim and just seeing what they think about it, what works, what doesn't work, and so on and so forth. It's very easy to overlook simple ideas and functions when you're focused on the big picture, but a user in this sense would easily be able to point out small details that most people would consider a given. Another very valid point that was realized is that we live in a very fast-paced world, and a matter of too many clicks within an app can mean the difference between a user choosing your product over someone else's. Maybe if it's taking too long for them to create an account and log in and just get to where they need to go, they just say forget it, and they move on and try to find something else that works. So keeping things streamlined, keeping it simple, and really, really trying to focus on what's most important to the user. And last but not least, is to not be afraid to look a little bit deeper than just your usability testing when you're designing a product like this. We're all human after all. We can all just as easily miss a detail as the next person. So it's really completely acceptable to take a second, third, and a fourth look at something that you might be thinking is perfect and a done deal, just to really reiterate the fact that the product is delivering exactly what you want, nothing more, nothing less, and giving the user just what they need. So that's where we're at with Vogo. Hope you all enjoyed this presentation, and thank you very much for your time.